Lights, camera, action. This is the Red Carpet Podcast with your hosts, Luke Andersen and Dane Salmons. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Red Carpet Podcast. I am Dane Salmons, and I'm joined by my co-host, Luke Andersen. Yeah. What's that?
It was the demon inside of my stomach coming out, because yesterday was Halloween, and now it's time to leave my...
Now the Diablo 4 trailer is out, so...
That trailer, it's sick.
It was a good trailer.
Really good trailer.
We should start a video game podcast, like as a sister channel to this one, and we can just talk about Diablo 4.
Well, I have so much time that, I'd love to talk about video games too.
Yeah.
And do this. Well, I'm sure you would love having to edit an entire podcast.
A whole nother podcast.
Honestly, though, I would love to do that. I love games, so.
Yeah. No, for sure. So, we're here to talk about a movie that we both saw this week, The Peanut Butter Falcon, which was it was an absolute blast.
Yeah.
It was such an enjoyable film, and I'm really excited to talk about that one and just kind of talk about my nostalgia that really hit with that movie, because that was a movie that hit me in places I didn't realize were sensitive,
It was wonderful sitting next to you in the theater, because the amount of times you're like that, I know that, and I know that, and it was, I think at the end you said it was targeted for you.
Yeah, it felt like a movie targeted for me.
Completely was location, subject, it was just great. Anyways.
Yeah, but let's start off with a few stories. We got a little bit of older stories because we didn't do news last week.
Nope.
We just went straight into the movie. So we got a few little stories to talk about with this one. For starters, and this one is actually the most recent one that happened, and one of the ones I'm most excited about. So the Into the Spider-Verse sequel that has been highly anticipated, and people have been waiting for the announcement, has officially gotten its release date. Announced today, maybe an hour and a half ago. The sequel is set for April 8th, 2022. In almost 2 years, probably over 2 years.
Right.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Into the Spider-Verse was one of those movies that came out. I didn't have any faith in Sony to do a good movie. Yeah. It was a little strange looking. Cause I know the characters, but I'm like, wow, this is a lot to throw into one movie, with the multiverse and all that. Yeah. And it was one of the best movies of that year. It was so good that they told Disney to sit their butts down. We're taking the Academy Award for Best Animated, and there's nothing you can do to stop us.
Yeah, it was that movie. I was amazed at just how defining it was as far as for animated movies go. It was kind of a high watermark in a lot of ways for what it was doing, which was unlike anything else. You hear people talk about that movie in the same breath as some of the other greatest animated movies of all time. I think it's totally fair, because just the tech behind it, the way, most of all, just the sheer effort and technique behind it was pretty incredible. And so I'm very curious, if they could, I imagine they can do it again, right? If you have Phil and Lord there, or Lord Miller there, and you have that team, then I don't see any reason why they couldn't pull it off again. I
think as well, because I'm sure many people are disappointed, we have to wait that long, but I think that's even more exciting because they have the time and the money to make a sequel that is worthy of the first film. This isn't just a film that is being rushed out to work because it has the momentum and it has the hype behind it. This isn't a movie that they're just rushing right into to we got to strike while the iron's hot. They're taking their time to make this movie as great as it can be. And that makes me really excited, because that alone, because we already talked about video games a little bit, one of the things that it's always blatantly evident with video games is that there are games that are rushed out and are buggy upon release, but they were rushed out because they said this is going to happen, and they rushed it out to strike while the iron's hot, and then it's just a buggy mess, and they have to patch it in post, or do updates to fix their game after release. But then there's other companies that will say Nintendo has done this a lot with a lot of their games.
They have or the term that was Shigeru Miyamoto once said, just like I'm totally butchering this, but it's basically a delayed game, or a broken game that's released essentially is broken forever, whereas a game that is like just like delayed, it's like that still has the potential to be good. Yeah. Essentially, that's their mantra.
Yeah,
it seems like.
And just look at the difference between a game like No Man's Sky and like, what is it? The new Animal Crossing, or even just the new Metroid Prime that's coming out.
Right.
Because they straight up said like, we are restarting with Metroid Prime. I think it's 4 they're doing. They straight up said like, this game is not where we want it to be. We are completely rebooting our production and starting over from scratch. Please be patient with us.
It's been interesting seeing how much games in general have become more open about their about their production.
Yeah.
Because there is a sense of in movies, all the bad production stuff, you like have to do some research to see what's going on. In fact, to the point where I was actually pretty surprised that they announced it this early in advance, that this is the date that it's coming. It's like, wow, really shooting your shot. I mean, I guess at the same time, if you have made that movie and you understand, because that was the biggest thing watching, information about that movie about Spider-Verse, was that it was like, how did you have enough time to do this? Like they talked about how long it would take, right, for some of those just frames of animation to be created. It was insane.
Exactly.
So I'm very excited to see what this is like. And it, well, I don't think it's good that the production isn't being rushed. I will say that the fact that they are announcing it this early on, I think it's still pretty wild.
It is a little wild because now we have to wait that long. And I remember when like a movie was announced like for a year and it was like, wow, that's such a wait. But this is definitely
it's crazy. Yeah.
This is definitely crazy, but it makes me hopeful that it shows that they care enough to say like, we're taking our time with this, and this is the amount of time we're going to spend working on this particular movie. And that, because the care and love was there in the first one, and it shows that it's still there. It's not just about like marketing and like making money. This is like almost like passion for the people doing it.
I would hope. Yeah.
I would hope so.
I don't know how you can make that without it. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the next story here, another like highly anticipated one for me, but switching over from like animated over to documentary. So the director of one of my favorite films from I think last year, it was a two-way tie between what my favorite movie of 2018 was, and it was a tie between Hereditary and this documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Yeah, incredible.
And so the director of that movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor, as well as like the Oscar winner 20 Feet from Stardom, is set to direct a new documentary which is focusing on Anthony Bourdain. And this one hits close to home because I'm a video production major, obviously, and my dream was to work on TV shows related to like the Travel Channel and Discovery and shows like that. I wanted to be like a cameraman and video producer for shows like that. And one of the names that always like was important to me when I was like, I want to get into this, was Anthony Bourdain. I dreamed of being the cameraman for Anthony Bourdain's shows, and so when he passed away, that was devastating for me. And so I'm looking at this movie, this Anthony Bourdain documentary, and I'm thinking, this freaking director is gonna like flipping twice in a row get me to sob in the theater as I'm watching these movies. He did it with Mr. Rogers, and he's going to do it with Anthony Bourdain. This is actually just bullying from this director now. I mean, you just think of the arc of Anthony Bourdain and everything he went through, and obviously, how his life ended and all that. It was just, I think that has the potential to be a really special documentary. Exactly.
And I like with whoever is doing it, but let alone someone who, made one of my favorite movies the past little while, like Won't You Be My Neighbor is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And just a textbook way of making a documentary. Just like we're talking to people that cared about him, and we're learning what his story is. And even if he was to just take that approach, I think they could get so much out of that.
Exactly. And it's an important documentary too. Like just let alone the fact that I was an Anthony Bourdain fan, and like a huge fanboy for him. He was one of the top 5 people I would have wanted to meet. Totally. Like personally, but it's also an important documentary to like show like the idea of depression and like mental health and suicide, and it's an important documentary to talk about those, especially with a guy that seemed really well off, like Anthony Bourdain, and a guy that like by all intents and purposes everyone said he was one of the nicest guys they've ever met. Right. So that is such an important documentary. I mean, there's not too much we can say about this, just because there's not. Otherwise, it's really just personal like feelings. There's not much to like break down, but it's just really personal for me. Yeah. A documentary that is going to be something very important for me when it comes out.
Agreed.
So
yeah, excited to see it for sure.
Yeah.
As someone who doesn't actually have as much history with Anthony Bourdain,
yeah,
I still am very excited about that. Yeah.
Definitely. Other things we're excited about include we just watched this one a few minutes ago, the trailer for Marriage Story, starring Scarlett Johansson, Adam Driver, and Laura Dern. So I watched this a few days ago by myself, but you just watched it, so you have some fresh opinions. Go ahead and lead us off on this.
Yeah, the reason I hadn't watched it is because I don't have any personal experience with divorce. Obviously, that's like the central part of this movie. There are these, both of the characters played by Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver, they're getting a divorce, right? Yeah. And so just the idea of relationship turmoil in general is something that just stresses me out, whether that be knowing about friends who are dealing with relationship struggles, or even just like non-marriage, just relationship troubles. And watching that trailer, so I was putting it off, frankly, because I was like, I don't know. But now that I sat down and watched it, I was like, I love it. I mean, they're doing exactly what I assumed, and from like the stills that I had seen, which is a very realistic sort of portrayal of this happening. And I think there's so much value to that. I feel like there's the potential for this movie to be deeply liberating for people who have dealt with divorce. Just the way that trailer was, the way the dialogue was written, the way that they were interacting with each other, felt like someone who was at the very least directing, or whoever had written it, from a lot of experience.
Very personal area.
Yeah, it felt really personal, and with that kind of subject matter, the best you can do is keep it as personal as possible. So it also seemed like it had like a decent enough sense of humor, because there's room for that to be like, well, what I loved about that actually was that relationships are so complicated, right? Like it's easy to look at, divorce in movies and stuff, and look at it as a very just like, oh, and they fell out of love, and and this happened. But there are so many good things in that seem like it's going to really do a great job of hitting the complexities of the relationship.
It feels more complex, because there's many movies where it's like, and there's a few areas I want to hit on that. There's areas where it talks about divorce, where it's like they were always like never meant to be together. But this one seems like it's more complex. Like there was love, and it's just fallen away. Like they've fallen out of love. Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't seem like, at least just from the trailer, it doesn't seem like anything drastic. It's just like that they weren't compatible. Like they're two people that just, it didn't work out like after all this time. And that's, I think, important to say, instead of just like, oh, this guy is a jerk, or this woman is like this. It's just like two people that are very complex lives.
Jeez. Well, because that's like, when I think about my relationship failures, it's never like this comical, freaking pop record type ending of a relationship. It was complicated, and when you ask why, it's like, well, it might have been this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I love the idea of approaching that subject. So we'll obviously see how it pans out, but at least from what I saw, it's like, what a killer concept.
It looks really good, and it looks really like a really good story. And the other thing that I think is important too, like you mentioned, that there's humor in this.
Yes.
And I think just adding a little humor works. The one thing I don't want it to be is The Judge Part 2. Did you ever watch The Judge with Robert Downey?
But go on.
It was Robert Downey Jr. I can't remember who the other actor in that movie was. I'm about to look it up just to make sure I remember for certain.
Is that the movie? I'm trying to think.
It was Robert Downey Jr. and it was Robert Duvall was the other actor. And that was a movie that had some incredible weight to it and some really weighty subject matter. And every time like a scene happened that was really weighty, and left you feeling uncomfortable, it instantly like cuts into like just typical Robert Downey Jr. humor. With that, or like there was a character that had some mental disabilities, like some type of autism or whatever, and it was one of those movies where it was like it's very dramatic and very uncomfortable. With this, Robert Downey Jr.'s dad he's getting dementia pretty much, like his mind is going, and so it gets really rough to watch that and uncomfortable in a good way, and then it cuts to the mentally disabled character and he's like catchphrase, and it's like it just ruins everything.
That sounds horrible.
It was not good, and it's like the good things were so good, but they just couldn't let like the weight sit. They had to be like it's
right, like trying to play it as comic relief.
Yeah, like very blatant comic relief instead of natural world comedy, which is which is what Marriage Story is looking like. Right. Comedic moments in like real comedy, like natural, like comedic, funny moments in a rough scenario. Unlike The Judge, where it's like the dad, Robert Duvall, who's got dementia, is literally like pooping himself, like trying to get to the bathroom because he doesn't know where he is. Like he's defecating himself, and then it's just like catchphrase, and it's like it's terrible. It's almost offensive, like to watch. Like
that sounds offensive. Like just based on the description. I mean, I have to watch it obviously, but that sounds rough.
Yeah, it's not good. So I'm hopeful that Marriage Story will be able to use their comedic, like to use comedy and like comedic moments, not to like undercut the weight of what's going on. Like,
looks like they know what they're making. So
a family that's falling apart.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
So let's look back a little bit.
Sure.
In our previous episodes, we spoke about a couple movies. We spoke about Joker, and we spoke about Gemini Man in back-to-back episodes. And I want to just go back for a second and be able to say, like, give an update on where those movies are right now.
Two drastically different places.
Two drastically different places in more ways than one. Joker has become the highest grossing R movie of all time worldwide, coming in at $785.5 million, which surpasses Deadpool 2. So it is one of the most successful R movies of all time. After sitting on it a little more, have your opinion on that movie changed, or do you have any thoughts on Joker after all this time has passed?
Yeah, I think my thoughts on it have only soured since. I think it's a worse movie than like the physical moment that I had after seeing it, where it was just like, wow, like you're just so emotionally invested. The more I read the more I read scripts from that movie, just straight up, just like single shots with just like the subtitle, this is what was said, like whether it be in a meme or whatever, and I just read it, and even if it's not trying to bash on Joker, I'm like, this movie, I think that movie was written like garbage. The more and more I look at it, the more I'm like, the script in this was trash. But I think, I do still stand by, like, obviously Joaquin Phoenix. I stand by the craftsmanship behind most of the other parts of it. But yeah, like the more I watch it, the more I'm like, yeah, just it feels cheap now. It feels like that was a movie made to gin up attention.
Yeah.
Crafted. And it makes sense to me why it would sell so much money based on that, right? And there are a lot of people came away from it being like, what a brilliant film. And I think even I was like, oh, well crafted.
Yeah. I think it was a lot of like hype around it.
Yeah.
And so when you see it, you go and you're like, this was a 9 movie. But I think I don't want to say soured because I still think it was great.
Oh yeah.
But I've definitely, my opinion has definitely been like, I wouldn't say it's a 9 anymore. I'd probably go with like an 8 at this point.
Like it's like good. Like I was like, yeah, like that's a well-made movie, right? Like yeah.
Yeah. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of the spectrum from that, Gemini Man, our favorite movie that we've seen this year so far, unfortunately, for some reason, totally bombed at the box office, and I don't understand why. It lost $75 million at least at the box office, and I'm dumbfounded.
If it had been able to fulfill the vision of the director and had 120 frames per second on every screen in the United States of America, we would have been the best movie ever made. Make no mistake. Everybody would have been shooting in, what is that? Like 5 times the traditional frame rate of a movie. Like, oh yeah, it would have been the new standard.
Yeah. I feel like this movie needed to. James Cameron knows what he's talking about. They need to follow some of James Cameron's advice. Or maybe not. Maybe it would have been successful.
James Cameron's Gemini Man 2.
Gemini Man 2 by James Cameron.
Army of Will Smiths.
Army of Will Smiths. It's perplexing to me how a movie this good can just lose out on $75 million just at the box office. Has your opinion on this movie changed at all? No, it hasn't. So
like we can go into it.
No, we don't. We've said what we needed to say on this movie.
Yep.
Watch the Gemini Man episode of the Red Carpet podcast if you haven't already. Cheap plug.
Yeah, I love I'll never forget when we were in here setting up for a podcast and one of your roommates came down and said, "Oh, I'm going on a date." And we're like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah, so what were your thoughts on and it just seemed kind of like unrelated. He's like, "So what were you guys' thoughts on Gemini Man?" And we're like, "Oh, that movie was awful. Like it's a horrible movie." And he's like, "Well, I'm going to go see it right now." And we're like, "Oh, you'll find something to enjoy. It'll be fine. It'll be good to watch with the girl." Yeah.
The instant panic, like backtracking, like, "Oh, no." I felt so bad for him. He came back. He said it sucked.
Okay, I was.
But apparently, he said the audio wasn't as bad as it was. So it might have been a theater thing.
I think it might have been a theater thing. I talked to one of my friends, and he's like, "Oh yeah, Fat Cats. Shout out Fat Cats, the only major theater in Rexburg." Assuming that the audio in there is apparently consistently awful sometimes. Yeah. So
sounds
noted.
Right. Welcome to Idaho. Welcome to Rexburg, Idaho. We have two theaters. We have Fat Cats where the audio is terrible. It's literally a Chuck E. Cheese.
And literally a Chuck E. Cheese.
And we have it's a Chuck E. Cheese with a fetching movie theater.
Yeah, I always, to this day, since I first got here, I didn't like Fat Cats just because of the name. This is a totally off topic, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Every time I think of Fat Cats, I imagine the owner of Fat Cats, and he has got like the biggest belly on the planet. He has a really thick mustache, wears a top hat, and he comes out and he is just sweating. Like he's just dripping in sweat. And he's just like, "Hello, my name is Mr. Fat Cat. I gotta give you guys I'm so happy all the college kids come. We need to get more snacks in here, get more food. I need to can we start making pizza here?"
You're making Ryan laugh back there.
That place is coated in grease, head to toe. I hate that place. It's like watching a movie in a bunker with really loud speakers. Mm-hmm. Anyways, okay, I'll stop.
Paramount, as much as I love Paramount, that place looks like a dump. It's such a dirty theater.
I appreciate that.
I enjoy Paramount.
It feels sincere.
It feels sincere. We get our movies months after they get out of theaters. We get our movies like after they get out of theaters at Paramount. The theaters are garbage. Yep. They look like crap. But it's just so nice to go there. It's just like it's not exactly aesthetically pleasing.
I like the atmosphere feels way more sincere. Mm-hmm. Which I know I just said, but like Fat Cats, it feels like they took the flavor of Chuck E. Cheese pizza and turned it into a place.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Anyways.
We're running. We need to move on to the Peanut Butter Falcon, but I just want to ask one more question.
Great.
So, the Oscar field is starting to take shape right now, and it's starting to actually like campaigning is actually about to begin. Sony has announced that they will campaign Leonardo DiCaprio for Best Actor and Brad Pitt for Best Supporting Actor in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which you still need to see, I think.
I have not seen that movie yet.
If you get the chance, you should. It's really good. Totally. And meanwhile, Christian Bale and Matt Damon will both be competing for Best Actor in Ford versus Ferrari. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's still more just like the field is taking shape.
Sure.
Are there any favorites that you have right now going into Best Actor, Leading Actor category? Out of like the names we've kind of discussed with like Joaquin, Damon, Bale, Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, are there any names that are like kind of sticking out to you that you think this guy?
Yeah, I think my like gut wants to be like Joaquin. I think it's more just like he's just freshest in my mind. Like I genuinely, I think that performance is great, I also feel like that is such a just like I get to go all out in this performance. And so like it's cool, but I I don't know yet. I need to. I would need to kind of take another really hard look at the movies that have come out so far. But as far as the only one, he was the only person whose acting I remember, and that is probably just because of how insane his acting was in that movie. And it was good, but it was also so over the top that it's like hard to ignore.
It was the most memorable performance probably so far. So anyway, let's move on from these stories and let's talk about the Peanut Butter Falcon.
Absolutely.
So go ahead and introduce this movie for us, Luke.
So the Peanut Butter Falcon, incredible movie. I'm just sorry, right off the bat, I love that movie. I loved it so much.
Spoiler alert.
Yes. So it was directed by two directors, Tyler Nilsson and Michael Schwartz.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you know if they've done anything else? Like if you just click on their names, have they done?
I'm sure independently they've done stuff, but this already is somewhat of an indie film. Everything when you search these people, it's all Peanut Butter Falcon. So I don't know what their histories are. I wish I did. I'm definitely going to look into it more now.
Yeah.
But yeah, because just the directing in that movie I thought was also really good. But anyways, so directed by Tyler Nilsson and Michael Schwartz, and then starring you have Zach Gottsagen. I don't know exactly how you pronounce that, but he plays the character Zach, and then Tyler is played by Shia Labeouf, and then Eleanor is played by Dakota Johnson. So those are kind of some the general rundown, I guess, of the folks that were in it and involved, and the main bit of it, what it's kind of about, is about at least this is the way I've been pitching it to people without going into too much detail, is it is about a man with Down syndrome who wants to become a professional wrestler, and it is his Tom Sawyer-esque journey.
Yeah,
very Tom Sawyer-esque journey.
I didn't even think about that.
Oh, it's
very.
All up and
you're
down.
absolutely right. That is a definite like Tom Sawyer type of movie.
In fact, when I looked up that movie's like plot synopsis, just because I was curious, I'm like, what do you say about this? It literally said like a Tom Sawyer-esque journey or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is literally, and I had been thinking it the entire time because it's such a they literally say Tom Sawyer in the movie. They kind of are poking at Shia LaBeouf's character, Tyler, literally references it at some point, kind of making clear like, yes, we know that you know, like it's clear. They're on a raft on the bayou, and there are interesting characters they meet around. Very character heavy movie that they meet along the way. And anyways, so yeah, that is the gist of what that movie is. And I guess, where to start with this movie?
There's so many areas that I could talk about, because like you mentioned at the start, this is a movie that was very personal to me, and I wasn't expecting it to be personal, because from hearing the plot I'm like, oh, that seems like a fun Tom Sawyer movie, like a young man with Down syndrome, an outlaw pretty much. It's like, oh, this will be fun. And then I watch it, and just so many of the little elements just felt like they were like picking at me, like specifically. Like they name dropped Indian River during the movie. Like, you ever been to the Indian River? And it's like, I'm from Indian River County. Like, I was born in Indian River County, and I've spent a good portion of my life out there. Literally, my hometown of Vero Beach, Florida. I live 30 minutes outside of a place that is a town called Yeehaw Junction, Florida. So these settings of the movie, where it's just very southern, like southern towns, southern people, it's very nostalgic, because I've driven through places like this, or the people are like that. Many of my dad's friends are people that are like that live in areas like that. Just very, very, it's a little stereotypical southern, but it's very real at point, because like literally I live in Yeehaw Junction, Florida. This is real. This is an actual place. And so like that spoke to me. And of course, for people that don't know, and if you don't know, like you just need to talk to me for more than like 30 minutes to realize I'm a huge professional wrestling fan. I am a huge fan of professional wrestling. And the big part of this movie was focused on like backyard deep south wrestling.
Such a good idea. Like, it's such a great premise. Like, I don't know how they came up with it, but it's freaking genius.
And so like here I am, and like you mentioned, I'm like, oh, I'm from Indian River, and then like they get to this little town, like they get to this area to look for the saltwater redneck to train this young kid, and I'm like, oh, that guy's Jake the Snake, and I'm like, oh, the ref is Mick Foley, and I'm like, I'm getting so excited over these little like awesome details that no one cares about.
Well, but definitely were intentional, right? I mean, I mean, the location is location.
It's very common when you're doing. It's very common in movies when you're focusing on professional wrestling to get actual professional wrestlers in like background roles to like play the wrestlers. Like, Mickey Rourke, I think.
Yeah.
The wrestler is filled with actual like independent guys. Like it's not just actors pretending to be wrestlers. They got actual pro wrestlers like to be extras in that movie. Right. So that's one thing, and it's just so cool. The ring that I trained to be a professional wrestler before I came out to college, but of course I'm out of shape, and so that didn't work out. But like the ring they were in reminded me so much of the ring I trained in, with like because like a ring is like just boards and like rope, and this rope was like just, it wasn't even taped up. It was just covered with like a little, like, I don't even know what to call them. It was like they just like put something on top of it and covered it.
Right.
It was just a shoddy little ring that's like super sketchy, and it's like, this is what I trained in.
Yeah, there was, speaking of that shoddiness, and that I feel like that permeates this entire movie, that deep south kind of just like backwoods, like a really, but a positive light, which I think is really nice, because usually that is played for like horror or something like that.
Yeah, it's like, oh, look at the deep south. It's like they're not really laughing at us. It's a very positive light of like the deep south.
Yes.
And it meant a lot to me being from that area.
And it does that without being overly deep southy, and it's like, it's no one's going here being like, don't tread on me, you know, you don't have any Confederate flags.
Yeah, you don't have the Confederate flag
or anything like that.
You don't have like, I mean, the characters are there, but you don't have like all the stereotypes. I mean, you got the trailer parks.
Well, yeah, and the stereotypes that are there, I feel like, are employed like properly, like in a way.
Yeah, it's employed. It's like, because they're stereotypes, but they're real stereotypes. But they're not laughing like, ha ha, it's trailer trash. It's like, these are just real deep south people that live in like trailer parks or like in these mobile homes. Because like my grandma lived in a mobile home, and it's like, that's just really what it was like, you know?
A couple things I want to say about this movie, kind of my biggest two takeaways. First one was that there was a scene in that movie where they're dancing. It's kind of in slow motion. It's where she's dancing with, where Eleanor's dancing with Zach, where I literally was like, I think I was like not holding back tears in like a like visceral way, but just like I was close to crying for like a good chunk of that movie, because I just had this thing of just like, I don't know the last time I've ever been this like in love with the characters. Like every one of those characters I just was in love with. You just form this connection with them that is so intense, and so and along with that, and how I think they pull that off, is that movie does a killer job, one of the best jobs I've seen in a movie doing this, of being simultaneously incredibly real, while also being optimistic, and at times just throwing that realism out the window entirely. And that's the most Tom Sawyer thing, right? Of like, you have these comedic moments undercut by like, oh, this is a really racist place. I mean, that's Tom Sawyer, obviously. It's not this, but because you have Zach, who has Down syndrome and is dealing with these things, you have some genuinely insanely uncomfortable and terrifying moments in this movie. Terrifying is maybe a strong word, but very stressful and moments.
Yeah.
And you also have Tyler, played by Shia Labeouf, who's this outlaw. There's a lot of stress there, right? But overall, it's just there's a magical quality to a lot of it, and it's the kind of movie where I could see a lot of people going to it and being like, this isn't very realistic, but a lot of it is so real that it makes those little moments where it kind of abandons that and treads into just a little bit surreal.
Yeah.
That it's great. It's wonderful.
I think a movie, and I've been trying to think of like good comparisons for this movie, because I feel like that's important for film reviews to like be able to compare it to other movies. And when you mentioned like it's very like fantasy-esque and like realistic fantasy-esque, like very dreamlike, the movie that came to my mind instantly was Sing Street. And it was like,
yes. Well, it's another feel-good movie, right?
It is. It's a feel-good movie that has some moments of like very harsh reality, and like you're sad, and like, but it's not. I don't want to say sad. This is a very positive, optimistic movie, like you said. But it's like a movie where there's like weight to it at points. Yes. But then it's a very optimistic movie at points too, and like you can focus on like, and it's like that's not very realistic. It's like it doesn't matter, like. It doesn't matter for like the context of this movie. And I think another important thing too is like there's not many movies that focus on Down syndrome, is there? Not at least off the top of my head.
No, especially not one that employs someone who actually does have Down syndrome and who does a stellar job. All the acting in this movie is phenomenal.
It was great. He was great. I think Shia LaBeouf, obviously.
Oh, gosh.
Like we all love Shia LaBeouf.
And even Eleanor Dakota Johnson, I guess, just a wonderful job of just like her conflict is something. So my mom has worked in or around that space, and the way that she talked about her job, the way that there were tensions between her and her employer, was so felt very real too, and I really liked that and believable. Anyways, speaking of that, unless you have
go ahead.
I think the movie that I thought of the most while I was watching this, but after the fact, was Joker. And the reason why is because I realized that those are two drastically different movies about mental illness and about systems that deal with people who have mental illness. Obviously, two very different types of mental illness, but nonetheless, mental illness in general. But this movie, Peanut Butter Falcon, I thought felt more real than Joker did. And I think Joker's whole thing was that, look at how real and grimy this is, and like, this is what it's really freaking like. They're getting abused all the time, and it sucks. But this movie made me retroactively dislike Joker more. Yeah. Because I realized, like, this is a real story where it's actually, like, the breakdowns in the system that they portray in that movie, and that debate between having care provided by people who are around them versus having care provided by the systems is such a present, like, my mom, she helps the state of Oregon work with just care in general, mainly care for, she does trainings for care for mainly, I think, folks who are, well, anyways, I don't know the details, but essentially the stuff that she would talk about, those types of things were so present in this movie and kind of like almost a core of this movie. I was like, this is it. Because in the Joker, meanwhile, you have their funding gets cut, which again is a real bad thing. Like, people need to get funding. And then you have like the counselor being like, they hate us. You know that, right? And it's just like, come on. You know,
they
anyways.
Don't give a crap about
which I know I'm comparing apples and oranges here. I'm aware. But I appreciated this one's depiction of mental illness much more. And not just because it was more positive, but because it genuinely felt more accurate.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. This felt like a very important movie to talk about with like these issues, especially with an issue that is not talked about in Hollywood very much. And like you said, this was the actor that portrayed this kid with Down syndrome was an actual kid with Down syndrome, which is so important as well. It's because it's hard to get actors that actually have these disabilities, but when they get them, it's so important to do that. It's like when you cast what's a good comparison? It's like the idea of like casting like a transsexual person with someone that isn't trans, even if they give a great performance. Like Jared Leto did great in Dallas Buyers Club, but he's not transsexual. And he's cast him as a trans person. It's like there are plenty of actors that there are a wide variety of actors that are gay or lesbian or asexual or transsexual that can portray these roles and be able to give a performance that's real to them. And it's the idea that Hollywood wants to like shine things up, so they get like the prettiest person possible to be like, okay, you're going to play a transsexual person here. And so they could have very easily said, we'll just get an actor to pretend to be Down syndrome, which is what the judge did, like I was talking about earlier with the kid with mental disabilities. And that they just got a regular actor, and I believe, I could be wrong, I should probably double check that, but I'm pretty sure like it was just because I feel like I've seen him in things before.
Well, it's not, I mean, that's not uncommon, and it's not uncommon for those performances to be good, right? But like for those performances of people who have, you know, a disability of some kind, and for that to be fairly accurate and representative, like it's not strange for those things to come out and actually for them to do a good job. I don't want to like totally throw that on the rug, but at the same time, this is a great movie that illustrates the importance of, we talk a lot about, especially in the past few years, representation. And they're like, oh, representation in film. But this is a killer example of why it's important to have actual representation.
Yeah. Because
there is that relationship there of like, this is someone else who shares my struggle, and there's also just it's easier to connect that way, and knowing other people who have been impressed, whether it be just other minority groups that then see themselves represented in it. It's like, oh, okay, now I actually have a symbol I can look to, you know.
Right. And looking it up, so
yes.
in the Judge, like, I was right. As far as I know, it was a character that had autism in the movie, and it was played by Jeremy Strong, who, as far as I know, does not have autism, at least not to the extent that they were portraying it in The Judge. And it just made it more offensive in my eye, because it was more like just his autism was comic relief in the movie. And like, obviously, like, this movie Peanut Butter Falcon was a comedy, and there were funny moments, but it was never like making fun of his disability.
No, and I think that I could tell it felt like thoughtful. It felt thoughtful in how it employed that, right? Like, when it was there, it felt like something.
Like, one of the scenes that was very more directly like comedic was a scene of him after he escaped. He's in his underwear running away, and it wasn't funny because he has Down syndrome, look at him in his underwear running away, because like you could see that in any other movie where it's like a guy is running away in his underwear and it would still be funny. It was not making fun of.
And when there were jokes that you laughed at, that it was stuff that he was telling, or it was things that felt like he was aware, like he felt aware of everything.
It
he was saying.
Never poking fun. Like, laugh at him because he's disabled. It was laugh at this because it's something funny, that is the funny situation that they are in.
Yes.
Because it's like, they very easily could have like poked fun at stuff like that, and they didn't, and that is such a relief.
Yeah. And I think there's room. I could see somebody criticizing this movie because it is such a focus, like, oh, why is that? But it's like, because I think it's intimately about what it's like to have that, and about the conversations that happen around it. I think now that I think about it, it would have been nice if they do this more at the end. I don't think he does feel like an agent, right? Like, it's easy for him to have just been a plot device, but the more I think about it, he is an agent for a lot of it. I mean, he's the driving reason why they're doing a lot of what they're doing. So anyways, it's good.
Yeah, I could see that as a complaint.
But I don't think it's accurate.
I don't really think it's accurate either.
I disagree.
My only complaint, and it's not really a complaint, it's more just, I don't even think it's really a complaint. It's more just like an area where I'm like, that's different.
Yes.
And I haven't decided what I think about it fully yet. Was the idea, like, the pacing of the movie definitely felt rushed at points, but I'm like, I'm not sure if that's like an issue or if more just like a subversion of like cliches in a movie like this.
Yeah.
Because like the conflict between the characters was pretty much like introduced and then it was done immediately.
Yeah.
Like, for most of the movie, Shia LaBeouf and Zach in this movie get along really well, and there's only like a brief moment at the start where Shia LaBeouf is like, "You're gonna do what I say, okay?"
Right.
And then like it's pretty much as soon as Shia LaBeouf meets Dakota Johnson's character, they like just bond, and there's no issues between them, and there never comes that conflict of like what your past. And it's the same with Dakota Johnson and Shia LaBeouf, where they fight when they find each other. And pretty much as soon as Zach, a little bit after that, as soon as Zach caught the fish off from the raft, their conflict was gone. There was no like there was no like development of like their conflict. It was just like, hey, we have a little conflict, and then it was done. But I don't know if that's a problem.
I think
exactly.
Well, I completely know what you're talking about, because I think the next scene is like very happy, like in comparison.
And it never comes back. They never like feud with each other. Like, you're still doing this.
It was stuff like that. So I had two thoughts about that. The first was that was where it felt the most kind of Tom Sawyer-esque, like the most storybook, like American storybook, in that it was like, okay, like there are a lot of just like coincidences that happen in this movie, or a lot of like things where you feel like, oh, how did they even find them? And it's just like in a Tom Sawyer style book, this is how this goes, right? Like they come together and then okay, maybe they communicate and then this gets worked out or something like that. Like, so I was pretty willing to forgive continuity because I didn't feel like it was almost at all concerned with that. But the other thing was there's a scene with her in the diner where she's talking to her boss. Do you remember that scene? Is that after this?
Yes, I think it was like they had already bonded. I think they were either just about to get to the wrestling school or
Yep.
Yeah.
That scene to me felt like the turning point for her character fully, but at the same time, I don't know.
Yeah.
That was one really, really kind of small thing that I could definitely see myself going back and watching and be like, yeah, I did feel a little rushed there.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's definitely not continuity, and I don't even know if it's rushed. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, because I feel like the movie worked regardless. And like you said, I just love the characters, and I feel like if they hadn't have rushed it, there wouldn't have been able to be as much like development on like the family aspect of these characters. Instead, more focusing on like they're just people feuding with each other, and then they just, after all this development, become a family. Whereas it was much more focused on like friends and family together, and I feel like that's made the characters more lovable.
It's refreshing.
It is,
because normally they would be all that. There would all.
Which is why when I say it felt rushed, I don't want to say it's a complaint, because I felt like it worked regardless.
Agreed.
I think the most important takeaway from this movie for me is that I want to go back to wrestling school after I graduate. So on a scale of 1 to 10, tell me what you think about this movie.
I got to give it a 9, and I think it's one of my favorite movies of the year by far.
So good.
I love that movie so much. I'm going to go see it right after we finish recording this.
Oh, so exciting. You enjoy that your second time. I'm going with an 8, I think, because like it's just such a fun movie. And it's so nostalgic for me to be able to see these deep South towns, like these towns that I used to drive through all the time, and see like a true passion of mine like shown on like the big screen in a much like realer sense, where like it's not just wrestling like Nacho Libre, where it's like Lucha Libre. This is like the deep South backyard wrestling of like people that used to be famous that are just doing backyard stuff. So it's just so nostalgic for me and just really hit close to home. So do you have any other quick thoughts on the movie, or should we wrap it up?
No, other than if people want to like fall in love with some characters and have like the most heartwarming movie I might have ever seen, like that's kind of what put me over the edge to say give it a 9, because it really was that for me. Then
it's just
go
so
see that
movie. Go see it. I absolutely agree. Go see this movie if you get the chance, because if it comes to your town, I don't know how wide of a release this has, but if you get the chance, you need to see this, because it's just it's so heartwarming, and one of the true movies that is portrayed as a heartwarming film that is actually heartwarming. And not just Hollywood's idea of heartwarming. So that's all the time we have for this week. Like we said, go see this movie if you get the chance. And wherever you're listening to us, be sure to follow us on Spotify. We're available on Spotify and Anchor.fm every Saturday. And we're available to watch on YouTube every Wednesday. We are on Facebook, so please like our page, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Anchor, and just be able to support us so we can continue to keep doing this and just having fun with the show. So I believe that's all we got. I think I'm really excited because The Irishman is coming out. It's November 1st as we're recording this. So it's coming out today. And so I think next week we're going to talk about The Irishman.
Yes.
So tune in next week for that on whatever platform you listen to us. And we will see you guys then next week.